Number of revolutions recorded by the clock mechanism multiplied by the number of the holes of the disc should give the number of the vibrations of that sound made in the given interval of time. Unfortunately for the Europeans, neither the first inventor nor the perfecter of that siren knew that sound could be obtained not only from the action of genuine vibrations, but also from the simple flow of air. And as this siren of theirs sounds only from the flow of air and not at all from the natural vibrations, therefore the determination of the exact number of vibrations by the indications of that siren is out of the question. And that sound can be produced from two causes, namely from natural world vibrations themselves and simply from the flow of air, is a very satisfying and interesting fact, and I shall now demonstrate it to you practically. Having said this, the venerable Haji stood up and brought from another section of the cave a pot of flowers in bloom, placed it in the center of that section of the cave, and then seated himself at the former monochord of the famous Pythagoras. Turning to us, he said, "I will now produce from these combined pipes only 5 different tones of sound, and you please look attentively at this pot of flowers, and look at your watches, and notice how long I continue to produce these sounds, and also remember the numbers indicated by the hands of the vibrometers for these sounds." Then, with a pair of small bellows, he began to blow air into the corresponding pipes, which then began a monotonous melody of 5 tones. This monotonous melody continued for 10 minutes, and not only did we remember the numbers indicated by the hands of the vibrometers, but all these 5 tones of sound were even very well impressed on our organs of hearing. When Haji had finished his monotonous music, the flowers in the pot were in the same state of bloom as before. Then Haji moved from the former monochord to the sound-producing instrument grand piano, and having again directed our attention to the hands of the vibrometers, he began to strike successively the corresponding keys of the grand piano, which gave out the same monotonous melody of the same 5 tones of sound. And this time also the hands of the vibrometers indicated the same figures. 5 minutes had barely passed when, at a nod from Haji, we looked at the pot of flowers and saw that the flowers in the pot had begun very definitely to fade. And when after 10 minutes the venerable Haji again ceased his music, there were then in the pot only the quite faded and withered stalks of the former flowering plants. Haji then again sat down by us and said, "As my investigations of long years have convinced me, and as the science of Shat Chai Mernis states, there do indeed exist in the world 2 kinds of vibrations, namely, so to say, creative vibrations and momentum vibrations. As I have made clear by experiment, the best strings for the production of the said creative vibrations are those made of a certain definite metal or of goat gut. But strings made of other materials do not have this property. Vibrations issuing from the latter kind of strings, and also the vibrations obtained from the flow of air, are purely momentum vibrations. In this case, the sounds are obtained from those vibrations which arise from the mechanical action of the momentum evoked by them, and from the friction of the air flowing from it." Haji Asvat's truth continued. "At first, we made our experiments with the aid of this vibrosho alone. But one day when my friend Kerbalai Aziz Nuraran was in the Bokharian town of X on business, he happened to see a grand piano there at an auction sale of a number of things belonging to a Russian general who had left, and noticing by chance that its strings were made of just the metal needed for our experiments, he bought it, and afterwards, of course, with great difficulty, brought it up here into the mountains. When we had placed this grand piano here, we tuned its strings exactly according to those laws of vibrations indicated in the ancient Chinese science Shat Chai Mernis. For the correct tuning of the strings, we there not only took the absolute sound of the ancient Chinese note Do, but also, as that same science recommended, took into account the local geographical conditions, the pressure of the atmosphere, the form and dimensions of the interior, and the mean temperature of the surrounding space, as well as of the interior itself, and so on. And we even took into consideration from how many people human radiations might issue in this interior during our proposed experiments. And when we had thus exactly tuned this grand piano, then from that moment indeed, the vibrations issuing from it immediately acquired all those properties mentioned in the said great science. I will now demonstrate what it is possible to do with the knowledge of the laws of vibration attained by man, and with the vibrations issuing from this ordinary grand piano. Having said this, he again stood up. This time, he brought from another section of the cave an envelope, paper, and a pencil. On the paper he brought, he wrote something, placed what he'd written in the envelope, attached the envelope to a hook that hung from the ceiling in the center of the room, again sat down at the grand piano, and without saying a word, began just as before to strike definite keys, from which there was again produced a certain monotonous melody. But this time, in the melody, two sounds of the lowest octave of the grand piano were evenly and constantly repeated. After a little, I noticed that it was becoming uncomfortable for my friend, the Dervish Haji Bokharian, to sit still, for he began to fidget with his left leg. A little later, he began to stroke his left leg, and it was evident from the grimaces he made that his leg was paining him. The venerable Haji Asvat's Truve paid no attention to this and continued to strike the designated keys. When at last he had finished, he turned to us and, addressing me, said, "Friend of my friend, will you please get up, take the envelope off the hook, and read what is written inside?" I stood up, took the envelope, opened it, and read as follows. "On each of you, from the vibrations issuing from the grand piano, there must be formed on the left leg, an inch below the knee and a half an inch to the left of the middle of the leg, what is called a boil." When I had read this, the venerable Haji requested us both to bare the indicated places on our legs. When we had bared them, there was to be seen a real boil precisely on that place of the left leg of the Dervish Bokharian. But to the extreme amazement of the